Day. Interestingly enough, this week's Parsha that we're starting is Parshas Devarim, starting the fifth of the 5 books of Moses. So let me just continue the recording.
Recording in progress.
So on the 5th of the 5 books of Moses, and the 5th of the 5 books of Moses is known as Deuteronomy or Devarim, right? It also has another name called Mishnah Torah, which is like a repetition of the Torah. Mishnah means go over. And the interesting thing is, of course, as everybody knows, it's Moshe Rabbeinu's farewell speech. He asked God before he left the world if he can give over some of the most main principles and of the Torah to the Jewish people. So I think it was about I think it was a 37-day Musar Shmooze, as we call it, a 37-day lecture series. Every day, everybody would gather, and he would go ahead and give them the instructions. Of course, this parsha basically is a lot of it is rebuke to the Jewish people. Even within that, the rebuke, though, we're going to see something really, really beautiful today from the Holy Baal Shem Tov that really does kind of like it gives us a higher level of really who we are and what we're capable of. And the amazing thing is of course I say that here he's going to give his farewell speech, and he does give rebuke. He goes over the whole incident of the spies, and it is important also just in terms of the time that here we are. We're about to go into the Jewish people's darkest day, which is the 9th of Av, the national fast day. Both temples were destroyed on that day. The incident of the spies, all of the calamities that happened, the main calamities that happened to the Jewish people happened on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of Av, which is next Sunday. 24-hour, 26-hour fast. So the idea here is, of course, Devarim, the Parsha of Devarim, this week's Parsha, has to be before then because it has to hit us with a sense of yira, as we say, or awe, really, fear, a certain sense of that there is a patch, there is this thing called Hashem does have to whack us. And Moshe Rabbeinu gives it to us in this week's Parsha. But along the beginning of it, he starts off with something very interesting that he does say to the Jewish people. That he's about to give this, expound on the Torah and all of the rest of the things that he goes over through the entire book of Devarim. But he says this praise, right? After that he's they set up that they need to leave Mount Sinai and go to the Promised Land, and of course the people are hitting Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, very heavily. So 1 second, somebody's in the waiting room. Okay. And so he has to hit everybody pretty heavy, that he says, you guys gave me a really tough time, right? And so he says, Hashem Elokeichem hirba eschem. God has increased you. V'hinchem hayom, and here you are today. Here you are as the stars of heaven for multitude. Okay? And may Hashem, of course, increase you, right, 1,000 times and bless you, right, as he has spoken to you. And the idea here is that we know, and the famous 11th century commentator asked this question, is, wait a minute. Moses is saying, here you guys are as the stars of heaven. They're not as the stars of heaven. How many people were they in the desert? There were 600,000 men, right? And their women and their children, 2.5 million. That's countable, right? When you say something is as the stars of heaven, you're saying almost as if to a level of it's uncountable. And that was what Rashi answers here on the sheets that I have sent to you guys, okay? Behold, you are this day as the stars of heaven for multitude. Or are they like the stars of heaven? They're only 600,000. Rather, what's the meaning? Behold, you are this day, which means what? You are like day, which means, behold, you are likened to the day. That is, you always exist. It's like an unbelievable idea here, okay? Kayom kayamim, as the day you are exist forever, right? Kachama ukalavana ukochavim, just like the sun and the moon and the stars, you are always shining. Moses is saying this to the Jewish people, okay? The problem is, like, what does that mean, okay? And what's his real point saying here in terms of you guys are today as the stars of heaven, you guys are shining like day. So we're going to get a totally deep insight from the Holy Master. Actually, this is brought from Likutei Maharan, okay, from Rabbi Nachman, his great-grandson. So he says here, it is written, the path of the righteous is as the gleam of light that shines ever brighter until the height of day. That comes from Proverbs, okay? So the path of the righteous, the tzaddikim, is as the gleam of light that shines ever brighter until the height of the day. That is, now listen to this, the sun itself shines in its place equally all the time, both on the onset of the day and the middle of the day. The sun, as we know, is always shining. The only thing that obstructs the sun, why aren't we experiencing this constant brightness, the illumination of the sun? The only thing that obstructs it is the earth, which stands between us and the sun. Therefore, its light does not shine so brilliantly like at dawn. So when the dawn is coming, you see the light coming out. You don't see the sun. It's getting lighter. Only a little bit until it spreads across the earth and then there's sunrise and then we see the sun. But of course, when the sun goes down, the earth is blocking the sun. That's why we don't necessarily see the sun, because of the obstruction of the earth. Simple, understood, okay? But the sun is always shining. What it's doing? But this is so deep. This is so deep, okay? So now we understand that quite simply. The same holds true of the tzaddik. Now, this is an interesting thing how he says this. Kain yad tzaddik. Who is the tzaddik? What is the tzaddik? A lot of times we go into the Hasidic writings, and a lot of times they really emphasize this kind of idea called attaching yourself to the tzaddik. And I'm still wrestling with it a lot, toying, trying to get it to fit where it fits into me, because I see a lot of things out there that the way that people's attitudes in the world in general, some people, not a lot, is, the way they looked at the tzaddik was a little bit above my range, okay? I'm raised in Los Angeles, California. I was raised among tzaddikim. And so I'm still toying with the fact, because we look at the tzaddik, and the tzaddik, if you look at the 10 sfirot, the array of the 10 sfirot, the 10 illuminations, how God goes ahead and has a relationship with us. As we know that the light shines through the prism of Keter, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, and then Yesod. Now, Yesod is all of the lights filtered down into this one funnel point called Yesod, or foundation. And that's really called the tzaddik. And from foundation, then it goes into the last of the 10 sfirot, the last of the 10 illuminations, the last of the 10 vessels, Malchut, kingship. And so Yesod symbolizes the tzaddik, who collects all of the light of above and funnels it and channels it and then gives it over to Malchut. It has many nicknames. We also associate with the tzaddik as being Yosef. Yosef was called the tzaddik. Okay, he overcame his passions. He became the conduit for all of the food of the earth. Okay, because of that channel, he was the vessel to hold the grain of the entire earth, and then of course give it to Malchut. And so then he was holding on to that. So when we think of a tzaddik, we will think of maybe the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Nachman, right? And then there are tzaddikim, there are many tzaddikim that we have in our history, but we still have kind of like a little bit of a difficult time. And the way it hit me on Shabbos when I was going over this Torah, that, you know, the tzaddik is not the source, okay? He delivers from the source. He might be like, this might be a crude parable, please forgive me, but the waiter at the restaurant, or let's say, I like what I sometimes, let's say I want to give my kid food. I got some schnitzel for him. I got him schnitzel, but my kid can't eat the schnitzel. I have to cut it into pieces, right? So I'm cutting into pieces and I'm giving it to him in order to make it that he can eat it. So the tzaddik, I'm thinking in a certain way, takes it, packages it right, and gives it to us, okay? Explains it. He's able to explain the Torah, the higher cosmic principles in creation, and then brings it down to us in a way that we could make use of it and benefit from it. So he's like a conduit of sorts. Interesting thing how he translates it here, because I also think, and this is something that helps me a lot, we do say every single day in the Siddur, before we say the Song of the Sea, there's a part where we say, Ki tzaddik ata. We're saying to Hashem, we're saying to God, you are a tzaddik. So in a certain sense, Hashem is the tzaddik, okay? I mean, he is. He deals with us with unbelievable righteousness. And it's really important that when I grasp that, because, you know, a lot of times people will go to a tzaddik in wherever. They go visit tzaddikim. I was doing that too when I first got to yeshiva. I'd go Rebbe hopping, tzaddik hopping. I find out this Kabbalist or this Kabbalist or this rabbi. I'd go and run. I go, give me my tikkun, give me my rectification, and give me a bracha, a blessing. Right? And then the tzaddik would give it to you, and you go, oh, God. And all of a sudden you feel so good when you go to him. And he'll give you an assurance because he's connected to God. And he is able to channel the will of God in the most unbelievable way. So you'll say, oh, that guy is a tzaddik. Or you'll see him do unbelievable acts of kindness, right? And you'll say, oh, he's a tzaddik. So there's different ideas of what the tzaddik is, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about it, okay? But let's look at it as the righteous, the real righteous person. The same holds true of the tzaddik. He himself, right? In and of himself, this righteous soul is always shining. They do say this about the tzaddikim, that they have more light, more effect after they pass out of this world as opposed to when they were living, okay? Their influence is greater. And to touch on that is an amazing thing, but he touches upon it right now. But to understand that tzaddik, wherever he is, and there are 36 hidden ones, right? We say there's 36 hidden righteous. In Israel, 36, and abroad, 36. All the rest of the world have to split that 36. I don't know where they are. Maybe they're in Brussels. I don't think so. Maybe one in Brussels, but I don't know. Okay, okay. So in any case, they might be, who knows, okay? But in any case, they are tzaddikim. And what it's saying here is their light is always shining. And the light of the tzaddikim who have lived, who are no longer physically here, they're always shining in and of themselves. Listen to this, listen to this. The blockage is only on the part of the receivers, okay? Which is an unbelievable idea, and we always talk about this, okay? That we always say God is always shining, and we're going to touch upon that. And what's the problem? The problem is the vessel, right? Every single thing in Kabbalah that we teach is light and vessel. That there's all this light, but there has to be a vessel to receive the light. The vessel has to be right, has to be in sync, has to be commensurate with the light. If it's not commensurate with the light, what happens is we call it the shattering of the vessels. The vessel breaks, okay? So we always want to make it where it's equal and they flow, okay? But the problem is the light of the tzaddik is so huge and so great and so big. What's the problem? Why can't we reap from their teachings right now so much in such a great way? The part is of the receivers, the vessels, us, okay? And this is due to what? The obstruction of the earth. What does it mean? That is the obstruction of the earth, this world. For people are sunk in this world and are unable to receive the light of the tzaddik. So just to get here now, he just said, the light of the sun always shining. Why don't we experience it even at nighttime? Because the earth blocks it. The sun goes down and it's on the other side of the earth, and we're on this side of the earth. The earth is blocking it. And just like that, the light of the tzaddik, the light of the righteous, is also shining ever bright. And why aren't we receiving it? It's because the earthiness that we get caught up in, the worldly things that we get caught up in, is a blockage from us accessing the light of and the teaching, the insights, the dynamic, the aha of the righteous. Okay, and now he moves to step 2. Okay, follow me. He says, this is as the Talmud said in a verse. So here's a verse from the prophet Zechariah. He says, I lifted my eyes. He's having a vision. I lifted my eyes and beheld a folded scroll. When you unfold it, when you peel it, and then it's dot, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So I'm just going to finish the line and then we'll go into the footnote. It comes out that the entire world is 1/3,200th the size of the Torah, which is exceedingly great and broader than the ocean. Okay? Let's get into this, because this vision, of course, is not to be understood literally. But we have to understand this from the Gemara and the way that they take it apart. It is absolutely fascinating. Stay with me, folks. So it brings down from the Gemara in Reuven 21a that the Talmud just juxtaposes 2 verses from the books of the prophets, right? One is Zechariah and the other one is Ezekiel. So in Zechariah it says, the prophet sees a rolled up scroll of phenomenal size. Then again, I lifted up my eyes and saw and behold a rolled up scroll. And he, it was an angel, who said to me, what do you see? And I answered, I see a rolled up scroll. The length of it is 20 cubits and its breadth is 10 cubits. Okay? Yeah, right. What's a cubit? Listen, follow me. According to the Talmud, these measurements are not based upon human dimensions, but divine ones. Okay, classically, how we understand a cubit is like from here to here. That's always been a cubit. It's always a way to measure your body parts, right? One from here to here is a cubit. Okay, but of course, we're not talking about man cubits. We're talking about God cubits, just like you talk about God hours and God time. There is such a concept, but we have to. It's beyond what we can think about. But for us, limited beings, we need this as handles to go ahead and get a grip and get a view or an angle how to have that relationship with infinity. So they're God's 10 cubits, right? Divine ones, okay? So 10 of God's cubits, as it were. The second verse reads from Ezekiel, says, and when I looked, behold, a hand was stretched out to me, and lo, a scroll of a book was in it, and he spread it before me, and it was written on the back and the front. This is a different kind of scroll than what we're used to, back and front. Okay, now so the Talmud considers these 2 scrolls as one, these 2 visions, and tries to determine its full size. What's the size of this godly, this cosmic Torah scroll? Okay, what's the size of this cosmic Torah scroll? And so it says here, first the scroll must be unrolled and then peeled, because that was the language. It was unfold it and then peel it. You're doing kind of 2 moves with this cosmic Torah scroll. You're unfolding it and then you're peeling it because it's written on both sides. Okay. So first the scroll must be unrolled and then peeled so that both sides face front, because you have to see the front and back together. The conclusion is that the scroll is 20 by 40 of God's cubits. Okay, we don't have to necessarily get into the dimensions because as we're going to see right now. Okay, we got the idea. There's a cosmic Torah. It has a measurement. It's God's measurement. It's 20 by 40 of God's cubits, so to speak. The Talmud then cites from a verse from Yeshayahu, from Isaiah, to determine the size of the universe. This verse is a classic verse that's always brought in the Zohar and a lot of the teachings, and they use it a lot of times to go ahead and figure out measurements, distances, cosmic things. And this is how the verse reads, right? Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Let's talk about God's hand. Let's talk about how he go ahead and formed creation. Okay, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and meted out heaven with a span? That's important to know. And meted out heaven with a span, because we're talking about heaven or creation in relationship to the cosmic Torah. Okay, so it says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and meted out heaven with a span? And, the rest of the verse is, comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance. All of this is poetic stuff, but there's deep mystical concepts in these verses. But the point here is to focus on the verse that says, meted out heaven with a span. Okay, according to the biblical measurements, a span, and look at the Hebrew, it's very important to focus on this, and I'll bring this back later on. It's called a zeret, or zeres, as he says here, okay? A span is called a zeres, okay, which basically is a half of a cubit, okay, as he's going to say right now. According to biblical measurements, a span, a zeres, is a half the length of a cubit, which is called an amma. And one square span is a quarter of a cubit, okay? So it comes out 800, because 20 times 40, right, is 800 square cubits contain 3,200 square spans, okay? Thus, just to get this, the scroll of the Torah, God's Torah, this cosmic Torah that, Zechariah saw, right, and Ezekiel saw this scroll to give it this idea of what's being told here, what's being taught here. So it comes out that the scroll of the Torah is 3,200 times the size of the universe. In other words, our universe is very big and expansive. And the Torah wants to give us the idea that the Torah is so much bigger, right? It is 3,200 times greater than as much as our science we can see and vision the entire expanse of all of the universe, which all of the galaxies and everything that is contained in it. The Torah is 3,200 times greater than that, okay? What do we need this for? First of all, 32 is a very classic number, okay? 32, as we know, that there's 32 paths of wisdom, of cosmic wisdom, which God created the earth in. You always have to know that. That's chapter 1, Mishnah 1 in the book of formation, right? Because there's 32 mystical paths. If you look at the very first chapter in Genesis, it mentions the name of Elohim 32 times, okay? So that 32 is a very significant number. It also, you have to understand, this is classic for everybody, that the first word of the 5 books of Moses begins with a Beit, and the last letter, like the last letter, first letter is a Beit, and the last letter is a Lamed. Yisrael, Lamed is the last letter of the Torah, 5 books of Moses. Beit, Lamed, right? The which adds up numerically as 32. And also, Lave, as we know, is heart. Okay? So Lave we have in terms of the Torah, and the Torah being 3,200 times greater than the universe, okay, than the world, okay? So here to continue on, okay? Going back on there, that page that I handed out to you, when you peel, right? So it becomes out that the entire world is 1,300 and 1,000, 1 in 3,200 the size of the Torah, which is exceeding great and broader than the ocean. Huge, very expansive. It is difficult to understand how such a small thing as the world can block such a great thing as the Torah, which is thousands of times the size, for the entire world is minute in comparison. Even the universe, which you would think is expansive. Well, let's just look at the worlds for now. Okay? So if the Torah is great, and the lesson being that the prophets are expressing to us that the Torah, the cosmic Torah, is so much greater, then how come we're not experiencing it so openly? How come the earth, which is so small, can block it? So listen to this. This is the rule, man. Listen to this. This is so unbelievable. And then I'm going to take it home to anchor it for y'all, not to leave you hanging. Okay? However, this is the demonstration that the Baal Shem Tov brings down, which is so dynamic. This is like the oft-quoted analogy that a small coin held up to your eyes will block a great mountain. If you're standing in front of Mount Vesuvius, okay, somewhere Mount Fuji, or any kind of great mountain, and it's huge, the mountain. So when you take a little coin and you just hold it up to your eye, what's going to happen? Okay? Of course, that little coin, which is so small, is going to block you from seeing the mountain, even though the latter is thousands of times greater. However, since the coin is in front of your eyes, it obstructs your vision until you cannot see something much larger. Likewise, when a person comes into this world, follow me, people, follow me. What I'm going to give you is so deep. When a person comes into this world and becomes lost in its frivolities, so that it seems to him that there's nothing better, then this tiny little world keeps him from seeing the great and exalted light of the Torah, which is thousands of times its size. And this is the example of the sun. Also, right, that the earth prevents us from seeing its great light, though the sun is many times larger. I remember looking in a World Book encyclopedia as a child and had a glass jar, how big the sun was and how many times the earth fits into the sun. I forgot that measurement. Someone's going to have to Google it. Like, I don't know, hundreds of planet Earths would fit into the sun, right? If not thousands. I don't know. It was like a bunch of marbles in a big, huge jar. And the idea here is like that. The earth blocks the sun, even though the sun is so small, because it's in our eyes. The earth and all of its frivolities blocks our eyes, even though there's a great mountain in front of us. Now, the big parable, which I know I've shared this with you before, so heavy and so deep, that there was this family, they were poor, barely making ends meet, and they heard that a distant place very far away was the dark mountains, right? And in the dark mountains, the jewels, it was diamonds and rubies and emeralds, precious stones, right on the ground, free for the taking. He agreed, take his wagon, sailed off, said goodbye to his wife and kids. It was going to take 2 years to get there and back. Went over there, finally made it to the dark mountains, sees all the jewels, and he's like unbelievably ecstatic and happy. And he's dancing, and then there's locals who see him and go, "What are you dancing?" He says, "Look at this." He says, "This is worthless to us, senor. You, if you want to eat, you want to sleep, you want to eat, you have to pay in rags." That's right. Rags is the commodity here. If you want to eat and sleep and drink. So he said, oh. He had to leave. He had to live there. He got a job in the back of a restaurant, saved up rags and saved up rags and saved up rags and saved up all these rags. And he had a wagon load of rags, and he's very excited. And of course, his wagon, because of the journey, was unstable. He had to fix that out. He took a rock from the local and he shoved it in this place to stabilize the wagon. Thank God. He comes home, of course. What happens? He takes his wife out of her hut. Eyes closed, and he goes, "Sure, look at the fortune that I brought." And she opens her eyes and she sees a wagon load of rags. And she says, I scraped and scratched for 2 years for you to go ahead and bring back rags. You shake it, right? So, of course, she's like, I can't believe it, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. And he's like, he finally realizes that he was fooled when he was out there. He got caught up in the rags and running for rags, as opposed to what was really valuable. Now, the point here is, what is that compared to? And the idea here is, of course, we're sent down to this world. And we're sent down to this world to get what's really valuable, to really reap what's really valuable, which are the diamonds and the jewels, which is really the Torah and the mitzvot. The problem is we got caught up in this world where they teach you that those things are worthless. What's really worth something is dollars and how much real estate and what you know where you own your real estate and what's your net worth and how many stocks you have. That, if you don't have any stocks, you're worthless, right? So that we get convinced by the earthly frivolities and the things that people think are valuable, but we, of course, we got lost. Okay, so when we come down into this world, we get blocked by something so small. It's a coin in front of the mountain. Okay, and that's what blocks us from accessing the incredible light of the Torah. The Or HaChaim brings down in the book of Deuteronomy. The Or HaChaim was the one who the Baal Shem Tov wanted to connect with in Israel, and he never made it to Israel to connect with him. They say those two got together, those two souls got together, it would have been Mashiach for sure. So the Or HaChaim does bring down, he says, if you would see what the Torah is really, right? If you would just taste what the real Torah, you would run to it. You'd be so addicted to it. You'd throw off all of your worldly stuff. Every single thing would be gone. You'd be completely addicted to the Torah. You'd be running after it and forgetting about so many things they bring down. When Rav Kook was learning, he learned what we call the revealed parts of the Torah, the Talmud, the Halacha. And when it was time to eat, his wife would come and say, it's time to eat, right? But when, or he would stop and take breaks, eat for bodily function. But when he was learning Kabbalah and mysticism, he would completely lose himself. He was completely gone. Like for hours and hours and hours. He could probably go for days and not even know where he was, okay? In terms of his connection. So in other words, in essence, the Torah, which is so great, it's there. The point is, it's there, it's huge, it's beyond, it's so massive, it's all around us, but there's this little coin in front of our eyes that blocks us from it. By the way, we do know, and the Baal Shem Tov has said explicitly, that the Torah, the world, is called Achizat Einaim. That's in Hebrew. Achizat Einaim, which means it grabs the eyes. It's eye grab, okay? Which really, as my father-in-law translated it as, an illusion. And a lot of times we've heard the Rabbi, but definitely we see it in quantum mechanics, quantum physics, that they see that really, what's the mamash, what's the essence of things, of reality? They can't really even figure it out because it has waves and its particle, it behaves sometimes like a wave, which means it doesn't have substance, and then the subatomic particles do have and they don't have, and what's going on here. And there's more space than there is subatomic particles, so they can't really explain matter in a real way. They just basically say that it's probability aptitudes, which means it's probably will be there in a second from now. Most of it they can't say for sure, because what's keeping the atoms doing what they're doing, right? Why aren't everything just melting out all over? And I heard Rabbi Weinberger say, hey, listen, the subatomic particles, even though there's more air than there is, that they're spinning so fast, like a fan that spins, and you see a circle when the fan is spinning. And so when it's spinning, it looks like it's a circle, but really it's just 3 prongs, but it's spinning so fast. And so these particles, subatomic particles or waves, it's all energy that's just spinning so fast that it gives us the effect of the hard table for us, the body. But really it's way beyond. Okay, but of course it's spinning like the swirling sword, right? The twirling sword, the Garden of Eden. That's one of I think I heard somebody say it also. Maybe I think Rabbi Weinberger also said it. That's the twirling sword to guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden that we have in Genesis after Adam got kicked out of the garden, is the spinningness of the physical world that gives the appearance of something real. Okay, but it's not. Okay? The problem is we have to start to train ourselves to be more tuned to it. That's what every single thing that we've been doing all this time for. All of this study is to train ourselves to know that there's way bigger realities, way bigger, 3,200 times greater than the universe. Okay. So going on here, okay. And this is the meaning of the path of the righteous is as a gleam of sunlight. We had that earlier. The path of the righteous is as a gleam of sunlight. It is exactly like the gleam of sunlight, the path of the righteous, which is what? That for just as the sun shines constantly, with only the earth creating a barrier, though it is much smaller, so too tzaddikim constantly shine. The energy of the tzaddik is constantly shining. It is only the earth that is the attractions of this world that prevent us from seeing their great light, but it's there. Even though this world is so very small and insignificant in comparison, it still obstructs and prevents us from seeing them, like the example of the coin. All this is because the world stands before a person's eyes and obstructs them, right? Until he cannot see the light of the Torah and the tzaddikim, okay, which is thousands of times greater. So he has two things, the tzaddikim, the light of the tzaddik, which basically takes the Torah and makes it where it's edible to us, okay? Because if you look in the written law, it says, put a frontlet between your eye. Yeah, right. What's a frontlet? How do we know what's a frontlet? Okay, what is it? Is it frontlet express.com? Yeah, where you go into a Walmart, can you show me where the frontlet section? What's a frontlet? So Moses has to come down and tell you what a frontlet is. That's the tefillin, okay? You need the tzaddikim to explain to us what is the Torah, what is God's will, okay? Interestingly enough, also, I believe I'm a Cohen, so I don't deal with the dead so much. And in terms of when they prepare a body for burial, I believe they put some clay things in the eyes of a mace of a person, okay, before they're in the preparation, okay, almost like that clay kind of idea of something that obstructed the person's eyes, okay, kind of almost like a tikkun or rectification. Okay, however, going on, if he removes that small obstruction from his eyes, right, that is, he turns his eyes away from this world and does not look at it, but only lifts his head and raises his eyes to gaze above this occluding world, then he will merit to see the great and exalted light of the Torah and the tzaddikim, okay? He does say, the Baal Shem Tov does say, don't get fixated on things. Don't gaze at physical things, right? Definitely things that are forbidden for you to gaze at. But even anything, not to gaze too much at physical things, thinking that is it. You have to kind of want to move above it. Don't forget, every single thing that we have in this physical realm has its spiritual counterpart in the realm above, okay? The idea is not to get fixated because it is the coin in the eye. Because really, their light, the light of the tzaddikim and the light of the Torah, is infinitely greater than this entire world and its attractions. It is only that this world blocks his eyes and does not let him to turn them away at all, to gaze above on the light of the Torah and the tzaddikim. It's there, but we're blocked. Now, this is exactly the example of the small coin that stands before the eyes and obstructs them from seeing the great mountain. However, follow me, it's very important. However, it is very easy to remove the coin from before one's eyes. Notice, I love that line. Thank you, Hashem. Thank you, Baal Shem Tov, right? We know, and part of my great teaching is, every thought creates a malach, an angel, an energy that only pulls you to the manifestation of that energy, of whatever it is, that thought. right? So one of the great lessons is, if that's so, that our thoughts are creating these energies that only pull us to the reality of whatever it is that thought is. And if you use the word hard, you create the reality of hard. Okay? If you say impossible, I can't, you are creating that energy that blocks. But it's like what the Baal Shem Tov says now, very easy. Now, you might not see the solution. You might still be grasped because your body is like screaming chocolate ice cream. Okay? But if you say very easy, so then you loosen it up a little bit, the grip of the little coin before the mountain. However, if it is very easy to remove the coin from one's eyes, just you got to use easy. I can do it. It's easy. Then one will immediately see the great mountain. Wow, imagine that right now yourself as if you're right there. You don't have to even see it. You have to picture it. You have to feel it within, as if all of a sudden, in this one moment, you were exposed to this unbelievable light of Torah, the unbelievable light of the teaching of all of the holy, righteous souls, right? Imagine if you were exposed to it. How would you feel? Follow me, the feeling of it. You can use that as a meditation, okay? And I'm going to anchor it in a minute. Then one will immediately see the great mountain. So it is with the world and the Torah. For with a small swipe, one can remove the world before one's eyes with a small swipe, right? Then one merits seeing the great light of the Torah and the tzaddikim, which shines in all the worlds with an unbelievable great light. Imagine if you were there right now, experiencing that light in such an unbelievable great way. Likewise, I heard in the name of the Baal Shem Tov who said, whoa, whoa, oy vavoy, we say in Hebrew, oy vavoy. The whole world is filled with awesome and wondrous lights. Secrets, yet a small hand stands before the eyes and prevents us from seeing the great light. Okay? Now I'm going to help and anchor this in the most unbelievable way. Okay? Because really, to get down to the point, he doesn't really explain it here. Because Moshe is saying this to Klal Yisrael. He's saying, Hinechem hayom. You guys are like the day. He's telling us that. Moshe is saying, you guys are shining so bright. You guys are the tzaddik. There's a tzaddik within us. There is. He's there. It says, we say in Pirkei Avos, Amech kulam tzaddikim, your people are all righteous. There is the righteous nakuda. There is the point within us. Even Rabbi Nachman says that in Law 282. There is that point of absolute 100% sincerity in terms of its relationship to God. It's there. And Moses is going, it's shining so bright, it's greater than all the universes, than every single thing. 3,200 times greater. So big. What blocks it? So, here we go. We go to the Torah. We go to shul. Halavai, we go to shul. God forbid you should go to shul. So we go to synagogue, and you might notice in synagogue, and you might have even asked this before, and there really is no reason for it. Quote me again. I tried to look up a reason for this, and there really isn't any reason. One little possible explanation. But when they raise the Torah after the end of the Torah reading on the Sabbath, right, or even during the week, they raise the Torah scroll, and what does everybody do? Right? Pinky. This finger has a name in Hebrew. It's called zeret. It's called, right? Now, remember I mentioned it earlier in the class. Zeret. Zeret, they interpret in the Gemara as being like a half of an amma, a span. But it also, all the fingers and have a name in Hebrew. This is like good old thumb. This is, right, etzba, right? This is called zeret. And what do we do when we see that Torah scroll? We raise the finger and we go, V'zos HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Israel. This is the Torah, which right, V'zos HaTorah asher sam Moshe, which Moshe placed before the children of Israel, al pi Hashem b'yad Moshe, according to the mouth of God. And people go, and I remember asking, why are we doing that? What are we lifting the finger, right? So one guy, he probably didn't know, or maybe he didn't know, whatever, when we're in a Baal Tshuva yeshiva, there's a lot of answers that go around. We always have to go back and rehash them. And he says, well, it's not polite to point. Because if you point with your finger, it's not polite. Right? And I'm like, okay. Okay. But you're still pointing. Right? So what's the idea with this? Okay. So like I say, there's no real reason. But what I'm doing is I'm using this Torah and a ritual that everybody seems to be doing, but nobody really knows really why. Right? The Arizal does, just to interject this for 1 second, the Arizal does say that really what you're supposed to be doing, and the Sephardim, they take their tzitzit, actually, and they take their tzitzit and they make a little loop with their tzitzit like this, right? I can't do it because I got my tzitzit cut. They make a loop and they try to look at the letters of their name on the scroll, okay? You're supposed to try to find the letters of your name, whatever your name is, right? So Yaakov, Tomer, whatever. We're trying to find, when they lift up that scroll, to find the letters of our name. So it could be that this is helping you to find the letter. Most people are way too far away. They ain't doing it. But so everybody's doing it anyways. Here's the anchor. Here's the exercise for us to deepen this teaching of the Baal Shem. That when we take the pinky, and we're going to say V'zos HaTorah. Zos means it has its own Kabbalistic meaning. Zos is the Shekhinah. V'zos is the Ein Sof with the Shekhinah together. That's a Vav and a Zod together. But besides that, we move the pinky in our eye to put it in front of the Torah scroll, just for a moment, to remind us of what? The coin. That the coin, or this physical world, our zeret, our pinky, is blocking us from seeing the Torah scroll, to remember that the Torah scroll is 3,200 times greater than, the cosmic number, than the universe. In other words, the light of the Torah, the light of the tzaddikim, our light that is within us is shining so bright. And just this little thing is blocking it. So in other words, you have the juxtaposition between the Torah scroll when you lift your pinky and this, to know the world versus the Torah scroll, right? So therefore we started a new club, right? We called it, what is it called? The creed of the pinky, right? The pinky club, okay? Those who lift the pinky, and we know why we lift the pinky, okay? We have to know why we lift the pinky. That the pinky blocks, but then we remove it to understand that our light is so great. And it's over there. And to work, meditate on visualizing, seeing it, feeling it, and living it. That light is so great. And only to run after the Torah, and only to attach ourselves to the Torah, and only to try to open our eyes and remove the blockages. And it's easy to remove, right? Just work with me, easy to remove, okay? So that ends the class here. Moses gives this kind of signal to us, right? Even though he's going to give us heavy musar in this week's parsha, the light within is so great. And all we have to do is remove the coin, remove the worldly things, see beyond it into the much higher realm, and to answer our calling, to be the light unto the nations, to be that shining light, and to not only we would experience the light, but also to be able to give that over. Okay, I'll stop here and